The parable of the scorpion and the frog. It begins with a scorpion trying to cross a river but unable to swim. It finds a frog on the bank and asks it for passage. The frog, afraid of the scorpion's deadly sting, hesitates. The scorpion manages to persuade the frog, explaining how foolish it would be to sting it, as both would perish in the process. Convinced by this logic, the frog agrees. Yet mid-river, the scorpion delivers a fatal sting to the frog. As they both begin to sink, the frog asks, "Why?" The scorpion simply replies, "It's in my nature." This nature could be summarized as the tendency to do harm just because it is possible for harm to be done. And the scorpion has the ability to reside in all our minds in the form of a whisper. The Enigma of Self-Sabotage. Edgar Allan Poe, the master of Gothic literature, explored the depths of human despair, madness, and the macabre. His own life, marred by tragedy, addiction, and loss, became a wellspring for his dark, intricate narratives. In 1845, Poe delved into the concept of self-destructive impulses with his short story, The Imp of the Perverse. In this work, Poe suggests that there exists within every human being an instinctual force that tempts us to engage in actions that are against our own interests, simply because we are compelled to do what is forbidden, wrong, or perverse. This impulse, according to Poe, defies rational explanation and is driven by the sheer exhilaration of yielding to taboo, to the extent that even the prospect of our own demise does not deter us. It is not merely a momentary lapse in judgment, but a fundamental aspect of human nature. It's as if, within the recesses of our mind, there lurks an impish whisperer, urging us towards the precipice of reason, where logic fades and urges reign. The Imp Whispers and the Imp Shouts. In everyday life, the imp of the perverse manifests in surprisingly benign ways. Consider the inexplicable urge to touch wet paint despite the clear warning sign, the impulse to stick your finger in golden brown, still sizzling caramel, or the sudden desire to splash in a puddle, even in your favorite shoes. These moments, though seemingly insignificant, are echoes of the same impulse that Poe describes. They reveal a curiosity, a rebellion against the mundane orders of daily existence. In the human spirit, even the most trivial of actions are tangled in complexity. Within each of us, there lies a thread of defiance, a silent whisper of the imp urging us to step beyond the boundaries, if only for a moment. However, the imp's influence is not confined to these harmless whims. It finds a more potent and often destructive expression in the extremes of human behavior. Gamblers, driven by the thrill of the risk, continue to place bets despite the looming shadow of financial ruin. Drug addicts, fully aware of the consequences, succumb to their next fix, chasing the fleeting high. In these instances, the imp of the perverse ceases to be a mere whisper. It becomes a roar, a commanding force that overpowers reason, logic, and self-preservation instincts. The rational monsters among us. In The Imp of the Perverse, we learn of the narrator's great plan to murder a rich man to inherit his wealth. He goes to great lengths to concoct the perfect plan, and once the crime is committed and the suspicion avoided, he is able to enjoy some years of financial prosperity. But slowly, gradually, the imp's pendulum swings the other way. It now urges him to confess, not because it is the right thing to do, but precisely because it goes against his own interest. And so the imp appears to be morally neutral, only counts what goes against its victim's own safety, regardless of common ethics, and sometimes it accidentally serves common interest, like a broken clock that gets to be right twice a day. This may be why most criminals go back to the crime scene. They secretly want to get caught, pushed by the imp's whispers. This is the case of Robert Durst, New York real estate mogul, who was arrested and charged for the murder of his friend in 2000 and still a suspect for more murder investigations. As the proceedings of the trials were ongoing, Durst inadvertently confessed to these murders in the bathroom of a TV studio where he is recorded whispering to himself, "What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." This confession, triggered by what we can surmise is the imp in disguise, is masterfully illustrated in Dostoevsky's magnum opus, Crime and Punishment. Seen from the perspective of the imp's influence, the novel and Raskolnikov's behavior take on a new light. The novel follows perfectly the plot of Poe's novella. First, we meet the protagonist, Raskolnikov, who devises a plan to murder a pawnbroker for her money. He kills the old usurer, but contrary to Poe's narrator, never profits from the meager loot he steals from her, which makes him even more subjected to the gratuitous perversity of the imp's influence. He hovers dangerously around Porfiri Petrovich, the magistrate investigating the pawnbroker's murder, feeding him with clues and reasons to suspect him like a child reaching for fire. Then, consumed by guilt, he confesses to the murder and finally finds catharsis. A catharsis he wouldn't even need if he didn't heed the call of the imp in the first place. It's also made sufficiently clear to the reader that both of these characters aren't crazy, unstable, or even mentally ill. They seem rational enough, don't showcase other signs of instability, and lack the emotionlessness with which a sociopath would act. They're normal. And perhaps that's what the imp revels in, the pleasure of pushing rational people to act irrationally. On the furthest end of that spectrum, characters like Patrick Bateman in American Psycho, or real-life serial killers like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, represent a stark departure from the common man's fleeting flirtations with perverse impulses. These individuals are said to be hyper-rational. For them, abstractions like morals, ethics, and common interest are inoperative. Only the planning, the process, the calculation, the action counts. The imp has utterly and completely taken over, to the point of obliterating any possibility of guilt that comes from the distinction between good and evil. This hyper-rationality, devoid of the emotional turmoil that accompanies the imp's whispers in the average person, allows for a cold, calculated embrace of actions that society deems reprehensible. The chilling aspect of this rationality is that it's not driven by the thrill of defiance or the heat of passion, but by a calculated assessment of risks and rewards, an example of which can be seen in the protagonist of Nightcrawler, Louis Bloom, a crime journalist who doesn't directly hurt people, but profits from their accidents and miseries for personal gain without an ounce of empathy. The imp, in these cases, is not a whisper, but a guiding principle, a constant companion that shapes every decision. This perspective challenges our understanding of the imp, suggesting that its influence can be as calculated and deliberate as it is impulsive and erratic, that the imp's role in our lives is as varied as the individuals it touches. Science, the willing ear. In the realm of scientific endeavor, particularly within the precision and empirical demand of disciplines like physics, scientists find themselves in a similar embrace of rationalism. Their work, driven by the necessity to adhere to objective evidence and logical consistency, often sidelines ethical considerations, not out of disregard, but due to the nature of scientific inquiry, which focuses intensely on the how over the why. But this hasn't always been the case. It wasn't until somewhere in the 19th century that this significant change occurred. With the emergence of physics as the dominant science, the divorce between science and ethics was signed, and with it, science, much like the imp, slowly pivoted from the voice of reason to morally neutral, therefore subject to its user's will, choosing logic over reason. To understand this separation, let's have a quick look at the relationship between natural science and philosophy through time. In ancient Greece, the birthplace of philosophy, Aristotle and other classical Greek philosophers addressed natural science issues in addition to metaphysics and ethics. This stayed relatively similar all the way through the medieval times. The 16th and 17th centuries saw the scientific revolution. People like Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton started to create ideas and practices that depended less on abstract thinking and more on empirical data. The emphasis changed to using experiments, mathematical reasoning, and observation to comprehend the natural world. And finally, around the 19th century, fields like physics, chemistry, and biology became increasingly specialized and separated from philosophy. As scientific knowledge grew, new techniques and equipment tailored to each sector were needed for these specializations. And when different disciplines established their own distinct methods and areas of specialization, the development of universities and professional bodies further solidified the division. Scientists, by getting ridden with the problem of ethics, found themselves a bit more prone to the whispers. If you can make possible the impossible, what does it matter if it's wrong? Murmurs the imp. Moral philosophers could object, but their voices were now muffled by the thick walls of academia. bricked up away from society in what the French thinker Bruno Latour called a process of purification. This process is the separation of disciplines and knowledge domains, and it occurred with the rise of modern academic and scientific institutions. This shift not only physically distances philosophy from other forms of knowledge production, such as the natural and social sciences, but also symbolically separates philosophical inquiry from its traditional role in questioning and guiding the moral and ethical dimensions of human life. This demarcation had profound implications, particularly for how knowledge was pursued and valued. The natural sciences, liberated from the philosophical considerations of ethics and morality, surged forward, propelled by a newfound autonomy. Meanwhile, philosophy grappled with its place in a world increasingly dominated by empirical investigation and scientific discovery. The philosopher's quest for wisdom and the good life was overshadowed by the empirical science's drive for progress and innovation, untethered by the ethical deliberations that once accompanied such endeavors. And with that, the question of what could be achieved technologically began to overshadow whether it should be done. Science's trajectory was altered, steering toward a future where its pursuits were increasingly measured by utility, efficiency, and novelty, rather than by their contributions to the broader questions of human well-being and ethical integrity. For many within this new paradigm, philosophy transformed into a mere profession, a source of income devoid of the philosophical underpinnings that sought to marry knowledge with virtue. Consequently, science, once a figure of moral and intellectual authority, became a demoralized agent, serving the demands of power, bureaucracy, and commerce. This shift heralded a new age where the ethical dimensions of scientific inquiry were sidelined, paving the way for moments in history where the capacity for scientific achievement would cross paths with the darkest aspects of human nature. Untethered by the moral reflections that might have once provided a counterbalance, the imp's whisper was now free to roam in the minds of scientists. The imp's shadow over human progress. When science, wielded by its most ingenious minds, is given instead of limitations, resources, it creates great things, terrible,
but great.
Like, for example, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The development of the atomic bomb was a feat of human ingenuity, the culmination of the Manhattan Project's relentless pursuit of knowledge. Oppenheimer's pursuit of atomic research, driven by a desire to end World War II, ultimately led to a profound ethical dilemma upon witnessing the devastating power of his creation. Yet the decision to use it was influenced by a complex mix of strategic considerations, political pressures, and perhaps an underlying whisper. Think about the power, the ability to end all wars with a single bomb. All you'd have to do is to just drop it. This pivotal moment in human history, where the capacity for scientific achievement crossed paths with the darkest aspects of human nature, not only altered the course of World War II, but also left a permanent scar on the collective human conscience, embodying the profound ethical dilemma of wielding such destructive power. In exploring these views through the lens of fiction, we're drawn to literary figures that encapsulate the entwined dance of ambition and hubris. Victor Frankenstein, from Mary Shelley's seminal novel, becomes particularly relevant when discussing the ethical boundaries of human ingenuity. Frankenstein's endeavor to defy death and create life through scientific means, driven by a blend of noble intention and overweening pride, ultimately leads to disaster, encapsulating the perilous path of innovation devoid of ethical grounding. This narrative closely parallels the aspirations and concerns of transhumanism, a movement advocating for the use of technology to transcend human biological limitations. Transhumanists, much like Frankenstein, engage in a quest not just for extended life, but for a fundamentally enhanced human condition. However, this drive to overcome natural barriers and achieve a form of technological omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience necessitates a careful examination of the potential consequences of our technological overreach. As the American mythologist Joseph Campbell puts it, any life or civilization brought to form as a result of a literal mythic identification or inflation as a concrete imitatio Dei will necessarily bear the features of a nightmare, dream game too seriously played. In other words, madness. The rapid ascent of artificial intelligence can also be seen through this same lens. AI harbors the promise to redefine every facet of our existence, streamlining mundane chores and reshaping complex decision-making landscapes. Yet, on the cusp of birthing intelligences that might eclipse our own, we hear the imp's seductive whisper about the divine-like capabilities to create, govern, and potentially annihilate. Douglas Richard Hofstadter, an American cognitive and computer scientist and Pulitzer Prize winner for his 1979 book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid, reflects on the question of artificial intelligence's exponential growth in recent years in an interview.
It felt as if not only are my belief systems collapsing, but it feels as if the entire human race is going to be eclipsed and left in the dust. There is a certain kind of terror of an oncoming tsunami that is going to catch all of humanity off guard.
Geoffrey Hinton, often heralded as the godfather of AI, shares much of the same fears that Hofstadter does. In a recent interview with the New York Times, Hinton was asked about the potential dangers of rapidly developing AI. He replied, "These things could get more intelligent than us and could decide to take over, and we need to worry now about how we prevent that happening. We'd be better off without this, just as we might have been better off without fossil fuels. We'd have been far more primitive, but it may not have been worth the risk." Hofstadter and Hinton's words are starkly reminiscent of Oppenheimer's, who, citing the Bhagavad Gita, famously feared he had become
death, the destroyer of worlds.
These words, one could argue, can be compared to Poe's narrators and Raskolnikov's confessions in their respective stories, words driven by the guilt of what was committed and the desire for a long overdue catharsis. One can only hope that for the rest of us, for the acts not yet committed, these confessions will not come too late. Harmony in chaos. The imp, with its intricate ambiguity, starkly reminds us that the line between our most remarkable achievements and biggest threats is perilously thin. It beckons us to ponder, is the voice propelling us forward invariably the same that lures us towards the void? Thus, as we navigate the balance between creation and destruction, it becomes clear that the voice of the imp can be seen as not solely one of mere temptation, but a silent Promethean force urging us to redefine the boundaries of possibility and to partake of the bitter fruit of knowledge. But at what cost? Unbridled progress, while heralding advancements, can only lead to ultimate devastation as it obliterates any notion of limits, which is vital for the safeguard of human integrity. The good it brings us cannot make up for the bad. Any progress we encounter in the path paved by the imp appears therefore merely as a step on the road to annihilation. The reinvigoration and rehabilitation of ethics is more than ever critical, a realization that many scientists and experts now share around the world, one that can be seen through the development of new fields like bioethics, cyberethics, neuroethics, and many more. But is it enough? The imp can never be destroyed. He will always do what he does best, whisper of the abyss. His voice can never be silenced. But it can and must be countered, balanced with another voice, one that common wisdom calls the voice of reason, one that resonates not in the mind but in the heart. Collective ethics can only work if it's paired with this more personal form of wisdom. Engaging with this other voice requires a moment of pause, of wonder, of deep contemplation, and a willingness to listen. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to Memopoli, and most importantly, share your anecdotes, examples, and thoughts about the imp of the perverse in the comments. See you next week.